Modern.
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 We're prepping for a voyage.
Modern.
The force of an old-fashioned equals whiskey mass times bitters acceleration.
Why don't you make that a double?
Modern Bar Cart.
What's shaking, cocktail fans? Welcome to episode 273 of the Modern Bar Cart podcast. I'm your host, Eric Kozlik. Thanks for joining me for another interview episode where I track down the best and brightest minds in the spirits and cocktail world so that I can share their secrets with you. This time around, I'm joined by Robby Haynes, creator of Apolog Liqueurs and now Hoste Cocktails. In our last conversation, he walked us through the ins and outs of old-fashioned mixology with his acclaimed luxury bottled Gold Fashioned. And in this chat, we fix our sights on another drink from the Mount Rushmore of cocktails, the Martini. But before we start debating vermouth ratios and stuffing our faces with olives from the garnish tray, let's take a brief pause so that you can make yourself a drink. This episode's featured cocktail is the Kangaroo Cocktail, also known as the Kangaroo Kicker. To make it, you'll need 1.5 or 2 ounces of vodka and 3/4 of an ounce or 1 ounce of dry vermouth. Essentially, as long as it's a 2-to-1 ratio, you be the judge of how tall you want the drink to be. Combine these two ingredients in a mixing glass with ice, with bitters notably absent. Stir until well chilled and properly diluted, then strain into a chilled, stemmed cocktail glass. Garnish with a lemon twist, or an odd number of olives if you're into that kind of thing, and enjoy. Today's vodka martini is, in reality, the artist formerly known as the Kangaroo Cocktail. Depending on who you ask, references to it started cropping up in the late 1930s, and it was formally introduced in print in 1943 by Oscar Hymo in his book Cocktail Digest, and by Crosby Gage in his 1944 Standard Cocktail Guide. As most of you will know, this is kind of at the height of the US involvement in World War II, and many believed that the Kangaroo Cocktail was named in honor of our Australian allies. The choice of vodka in place of gin is further attributed to an impending gin shortage, but I had a hard time tracking down any definitive sources online that could corroborate that, so that might be hearsay. Suffice it to say, at the end of World War II, there were probably a lot of shortages, and vodka is pretty easy to make. You can make it out of anything, so perhaps it's not necessary to delve too deeply or greedily on that particular question. Just a few short years later, in 1948, David Embury released his hugely important book, The Fine Art of Mixing Drinks, where he called this cocktail the vodka martini, thus signaling the end of the Kangaroo Kicker's brief time in the spotlight. Whatever your personal thoughts happen to be regarding the admixture of vodka and vermouth, I hope that the next time you enjoy a Kangaroo cocktail, you'll raise a glass toward Australia and maybe run a quick stock market search on the status of juniper futures, just to make sure we're not headed for another gin shortage. So, now that you know far more than is necessary about the vodka martini, let's turn our attention back to the interview. In this stirring, ice-cold conversation with bartender and cocktail batcher extraordinaire Robby Haynes, some of the topics we discuss include what people mean when they say martini, and why certain preferences and aversions pertaining to its construction may stem from unresolved fears and myths about ingredients. How Robby teamed up with distillers, winemakers, and cocktail experts to weave a flavor tapestry worthy of sitting on the shelf next to the legendary Gold Fashioned. What flavor research and development looks like in the gin space, specifically when it comes to nerdy stuff like botanical maceration, gin basket ergonomics, and ethanol proof points. Then, of course, we taste the Hoste Martini, and Robby shares recommendations about freezer settings and over-ice service that take this cocktail to the next level. Martinis in hand, we wrap the conversation by examining some of the softer nuances of martini service, like why cocktail bars are super controlled environments, why hosting a cocktail party can be so unpredictable, and the benevolent tension between host and guest that creates a true hospitality interaction. Along the way, we get into the latest updates on this year's batch of the Gold Fashioned, play a rousing game of Kill, Marry, Fornicate with iconic martini trifectas, ponder the mysterious vermouth tipping point, and much, much more. You can learn more about the Gold Fashioned and the new bottled martini at hostecocktails.com. That's spelled HOSTE cocktails.com. And you can check out my last interview with Robby in episode 243. But for now, please enjoy this perfectly balanced yet botanically complex conversation with the one and only Robby Haynes. Robby, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Eric. Nice to see you, man.
Yeah, same here. So last time we spoke, we were talking about a kind of a fun little project, the Sunday's Finest Gold Fashioned, which has garnered a lot of attention and press over the last year or so. But before we talk about the latest project and start digging into the art of the martini, could you please just reintroduce yourself to our listeners? Who are you? What do you do?
Yep. Robby Haynes, co-founder of Hoste Cocktails. And, before Hoste, also Apolog Liqueurs. And before that, a bartender for many, many, many years. And excited to be talking about kind of the Gold Fashioned rebrand and the launch of Hoste Cocktails.
Awesome. Well, I want to take us immediately to first principles here. We're going to talk all about the product details and what it means to do a rebrand and what Hoste means. But before we do any of that, I want to ask you what might seem to some sort of an obvious or slightly, dumb question. But what is a martini?
Okay, so depends on who you ask and where. My understanding of a martini is it's gin. Historically, gin, vermouth, orange bitters, stirred lemon twist. It's served, in a great cocktail bar, historically served up. Now, I appreciate all the different forms of martinis. I don't recognize, maybe some of the stuff that was coming out in the 90s, chocolate martinis, apple teenies, those to me are like just kind of bastardized cocktails. But a true martini for me is gin, vermouth, and bitters.
Excellent. Yeah, I think, if you polled the vast majority of, cocktail fans, that you're going to get wide consensus on the gin, wide consensus on some vermouth. Although I would say weirdly, the vermouth is like the most controversial ingredient in a certain respect. Orange bitters, not too controversial. The twist, really the only controversy there is whether we're expressing and discarding or we're going to leave in the martini. And then the up thing, I don't think that's controversial really, except I don't know if you appreciate, but I appreciate a martini on the rocks every now and then.
Yeah. Yeah, that's why I kind of like preface that with like in a cocktail bar, like when in a super controlled environment where someone is like going to drink that cocktail right then. I do think, people are particular about martinis in a way that they are really like not with other cocktails. And, when you get into the vermouth, some people like to quip and say like you wave the vermouth over the glass or like, you throw the vermouth in the trash can and call it a day. To each their own. But for me, a martini is not just cold gin.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. And, it's hard to say if it's apocryphal because so much of like the whole Winston Churchill kind of like mystique is potentially overblown. I mean, that was his brand, was being big and overblown. So it makes sense why people would say, oh yeah, I take the Churchill approach and just, raise the glass in the direction of France. And I mean, what do you think? Do you think that is potentially derived from people not refrigerating their vermouth for decades and decades? Where do you think the penchant or the popularity of the bone dry martini comes from?
Yeah. A couple of thoughts, some maybe more controversial. One, I think it's just a lack of not maybe a lack of knowledge and a lack of willingness to admit that like you might not know what something is. I notice this particularly in older males. who are like, no, they're like staunchly no vermouth because they're possibly scared to try new things. So I think that's it. Possibly we probably have a good point with like, maybe vermouth was not refrigerated or taken care of. And if you've got, someone's making a martini at home and their vermouth has been in the back of their cupboard for 40 years, it's probably not going to add much to the cocktail, but a fresh bottle of vermouth, really adds a whole other layer to the cocktail. And I do think there's a variance into like how much vermouth is appropriate. And I think there's along that spectrum, I think there are a couple of different iterations of the martini that are delicious. And you can get into some that are more vermouth heavy and some that have just a little bit. But the vermouth is crucial. If you're not doing the vermouth, you're either scared to try new things, it maybe had a bad experience, but I don't know how you could have a more worse experience than just drinking a glass of gin. So yeah, I don't know. People are kind of slow to adopt things that they're scared of.
Well, I like that both of those instances kind of involve some sort of fear, right? Fear of trying something new or fear of having a repeat bad experience. In both cases, you're afraid of something. And I think that, obviously, reflecting on our past conversation, you as a experienced bartender fully understand the role of the bartender in working with somebody to kind of maybe overcome those fears, maybe taking some baby steps, maybe, customizing your approach to that person so that, they can get around or get over or under that fear somehow. But I like this. I like that we got to some of these little inflection points in our conversation about the martini, because I think when we go back to Hoste and the brand and what you're trying to do with that, maybe some of this is going to come crawling back out of the woodwork again. But let's get into the brass tacks of this. You launched the Sunday's Finest Gold Fashioned, so I'm going to have you start by kind of reminding people about what that product is now kind of evolving into as you're rebranding to Hoste, and then also maybe what prompted you to launch a martini to kind of go hand in hand with that cocktail.
Yep. So in 2021, we launched the Gold Fashioned, which is a cocktail under the Sunday's Finest label. And we were dipping our toes in the water, so to speak. Background being hospitality and apple log liqueurs, our previous and still ongoing venture being focused pretty squarely on premise, bars and restaurants. We knew we wanted to do something that folks could enjoy at home. And, there's a lot of competition on the lower tiers or more economical, fast grab and go rungs of the ready to enjoy ladder. There's a lot of big players, big brands with a lot of money in that space. And so it's really hard to compete on price. And I don't think that's something that we were, interested in doing. We looked in the mirror and said, like, what can we do and do well that we feel good about, that we think folks would be interested in? And we said, okay, let's go to the other end of the spectrum and let's say, what is the absolute best possible cocktail experience that we can deliver to folks in their home. And let's use the best possible spirits that we can source or make in the case of the martini, great ingredients in the bitters, and let's package it beautifully. And then to further kind of differentiate, like a great cocktail engages all the senses. In the case of the martini, it's like your lemon zest. Old fashioned is your orange zest. And, that seemed like something that was really missing from the ready to enjoy segment. And so we packaged every Gold Fashioned in a beautiful gift box, and it came with an orange zest atomizer with blood orange, Valencia navel orange. And the idea was to kind of take the experience of going to a great cocktail bar, which is, multifaceted and sensory. It starts when you pull into the neighborhood and park the car and walk up to the door and open up and go down the hallway and open the curtains and go inside, sit down at the table, you're touching the menu. All these little like touch points that create this overall impression of an experience that sticks with you. And how can we translate that to something that, someone can take to their friend or family members home for a gathering? And so, for us, the packaging itself, is kind of where it starts, and working our way inwards to the cocktail, just like you would at a bar, to create a bit of a narrative there and give people something that's, can be a high point of the night, and something that, a cocktail that they can kind of celebrate at home.
Yeah. Well, I love that your impulse was, to borrow and perhaps misuse a cliche. When they go low, you go high, right? Because you're right. I mean, I think what happened we all saw it in 2020 with COVID, with the boom of RTDs of all sorts, right? There was the canned stuff that was already kind of getting popular with the hard seltzers and stuff like that. And then every bar started launching them, and so many states and jurisdictions passed legislation that allowed them. And so it just seemed like there was just a race to the bottom price wise, and it makes a lot of sense to just look at that and say, no gracias. Like, let's see what else we can do. Let's see what other, like you said, rungs on this ladder we can address, and we can do it in a good way. So tell us a little bit about the construction methods, and I guess like the blending, etc., that make the Gold Fashioned popular and so delicious. And then maybe we can start talking about how you then said, all right, we're doing this Gold Fashioned. How do we then try and replicate this specialness in a completely different cocktail format?
Yep. So, Gold Fashioned for us was and is all about, kind of showcasing really great vintage spirits. And just due to the kind of the limited nature of those ingredients, every year we've done a different vintage spirits based blend. It is a limited annual offering. So we've done between 3,000 and 5,000 bottles each year. And the production method is, it is a little more involved, but not totally dissimilar from making a cocktail. We're sourcing, for the Gold Fashioned, we're sourcing barrels of whiskey at barrel proof, tasting them, blending them. We're doing a split base bourbon and rye to get kind of the best of both worlds there. And then, so basically, we are making our own vintage whiskey blend. And then separately, we make a large batch of really special bitters, using the world's most exquisite spices: saffron, Tahitian vanilla, Ecuadorian cacao, gentian, Seville orange peel. And then we make a giant batch of Demerara. And then we make a massive Old Fashioned. And just like if I was making a cocktail for of someone at the bar, taste it and, internalize it, think about it and adjust it, really trying to find that little window where everything kind of pops and you get kind of the cocktail runs up the palate, and you kind of, can taste everything. You don't lose the whiskey. So that's kind of where the magic happens, I think, is in that last, little bit of adjustment. Instead of adding a dash of whiskey or a dash of bitters, you're adding buckets of whiskey or a bucket of bitters.
I love that image, because as you're describing it, and I was like, okay, I can picture these guys doing this in whatever, facility you're using. But then I just imagine you standing at the edge of a giant mixing glass on a bar, and you're just a very tiny man with stirring a bar spoon with two hands. And I love it because it actually does scale with a stirred cocktail in that way.
Yeah. I mean, that's exactly, that's what it is at the end of the day. Yeah. I really enjoy the process. Is fun. It's high risk. I think when you're working with, the case of this year's release, 10-year rye. And last year we had some 15-year bourbon. You can't mess it up, but you got to go out on a limb to get the fruit. And I like the pressure, and I like tasting it and having to say, okay, cool. I genuinely think this needs a couple more gallons of whiskey. Let's do it. And there we go. But yeah, the Gold Fashioned was great, man. And like I said, the first 2 years, it was more, we had a thesis like, okay, if we make a really fantastic cocktail and package it beautifully, will people be into it? And it was, priced significantly higher than kind of the competitive set. It was $150 a bottle, but the feedback was resoundingly positive. People ordering multiple bottles for themselves, giving it gifts, some corporate gifting, things like that. And, we said, okay, there is a market here, just like there's a market for a really nice bottles of wine. And, the Gold Fashioned in particular is might not be your Monday night after work drink. Maybe it is, but certainly if you're going to someone's home for a nice dinner or, holiday gathering, or you want to give a gift to someone and have it mean something and want to do a cocktail, like the Gold Fashioned is that drink.
Yeah, I'll share with you. We tasted a sample during our last interview, and I'll share what we did with it. So I did a guys' weekend with some of my closest friends. We rented a cabin. We all went shopping and got some great food. We all cooked for each other. We sat around a fire right by a river, and it was like we brought that and shared that as kind of a way to add even more specialness to that experience. So I think, anybody who wants to learn more about the Gold Fashioned, will link to that interview in the show notes page. We break down all the math and why it's actually a pretty reasonable deal. If you compare, especially nowadays, cocktail price of getting a old fashioned out at a premium cocktail bar. But now we've got a sibling for the Gold Fashioned, and I got to imagine that the construction process for this, some similarities, still a stirred cocktail, a little bit drier, maybe some different ingredients. How did you go about constructing it? And maybe you can share some of the collaborations that were involved in that process.
Yep. So, I think it really all starts last year as, we were doing Gold Fashioned 2022 and we were kind of wrapping that up. Then we were like, I think we said, okay, we've had a couple of years. This has been great. Let's really go for this. What can we do better? We knew we wanted to extend the product line, but like you mentioned, like your story, which is beautiful. We talked to dozens of people that had purchased the Gold Fashioned just to better understand why they bought it, what they did with it, how do they feel about it? Because we kind of felt like it was maybe serving. It was kind of a higher order emotional need than your typical ready to pour cocktail. And a lot of stories were similar. It's like someone was having a weekend with friends, or had people coming over, and they like to share the experience with folks. And we started to realize that, like, okay, cool, like having a large format ready to pour cocktail that's someone trusts, that's really good, and that they could pour for their friends and family, allows them to spend more time with each other and kind of make more meaningful connections. And the cocktail should be a moment, but it's not like the purpose of the gathering, right? Like the purpose of the gathering is to spend time with folks and connect on that level. So we underwent like a major rebrand to Hoste, and we're like, if we're going to extend the product line, we need to do this now. And so we can get into Hoste in a minute, but I will talk about the martini. So Gold Fashioned, I think, spoke pretty directly to my experience coming up bartending. It was a drink that I was really into. And we wanted to partner with someone to make another cocktail. Julia Momase has been a friend and a kind of beacon on the Chicago cocktail scene, and probably now the national and international cocktail scene. Really talented, James Beard Award winning author, has Bar Kumiko, just really dynamic person. And she has a kind of a unique cocktail perspective. She's from Japan, and we thought, I bet she has a story to tell, like in the form of a cocktail. And so we reached out to her and, said, hey, we're thinking about doing another cocktail that's going to be available year round. What drink resonates with you and how can you put your unique thumbprint on it? And she shared a beautiful story about her first martini and having it in Japan, and said, okay, cool. I think we can start there. And we looked to her for botanicals for the gin. She gave us a list. She said, cool, let's do something inspired by the seasons. And so we settled on sakura or cherry blossom, hojicha, which is a roasted green tea, red sancho, so like little peppercorn berries. And there's some kabosu, which is a Japanese citrus, and yuzu, another Japanese citrus. Awesome. And then we started making gin in a 5-gallon tabletop pot still, and I must have made 20 batches. I would do one, taste it, think about it for a week, go back, make another one, repeat. And just, for me, I was getting familiar with how those botanicals work and, trying to establish kind of what I thought was a cool profile for the gin. And once I had something that I felt good about, I would send it to her for feedback. And so we kind of just kept pushing and pulling on the profile. And then once we got something that we really were feeling good about that was working well in a martini, we passed the gin off to Ari Clafter from Thornton Distilling Company, who could scale this tabletop recipe up to their, giant copper still and, really kind of refine it and put a kind of like a sheen on it, if you will. In parallel, the vermouth, we wanted to work with someone stateside. I love a lot of the craft vermouths. However, and rightfully so, they're all pretty like unique and have kind of, less traditional flavor profiles. At least with I feel like with the ones in the States. And so tasting a lot. And someone sent me a bottle from a producer named Little City Vermouth out of New York, and a gentleman named Will Clark. And they sent me his sweet vermouth and his dry vermouth, and I tasted them and I was like, okay, these are great. Like this is like what I imagine, like a good, domestic vermouth that is, has one foot kind of rooted in traditional vermouth profiles, but just a slightly different spin. It felt like in line with what we were doing with the gin. So we worked with Will to create a custom dry vermouth for us that we thought would pair well with the gin. And, those were kind of our big building blocks. And I would say the most intricate part of the process was really figuring out the right ratio of gin to vermouth. There is a tipping point, right? Where like the vermouth kind of can start to push forward a little bit, at least for the type of martini that we wanted to create. And we worked that. I'm talking about like, I would make, several martinis, and one would be start at extremes, 2-1, 2 to 0.75, 2 to 0.65. Anyway, the ratio that we ended up landing on was about 4-1, which we felt, given the nature of the gin, it has more of like a restrained juniper component, and some of the softer floral things like cherry blossom. There's also some orange blossom in there. We didn't want those to get overshadowed, so that's where we landed on the vermouth. And so I
think 4-1 is the martini ratio that I first fell in love with. I don't know that it's where I currently stand, but it makes sense when you're describing the gin and the botanicals and almost the evocation of Japan, right? It's a slightly more restrained, slightly different cocktail culture than the one we have here, where we're drinking out of these giant, V-shaped martinis that can hold, 9 ounces of juice, right?
Yeah, I like it. And I would certainly, if you gave me a bottle of Beefeater or Tanqueray, and I like actually both those gins in martinis as well.
Yeah.
But I would certainly, if Beefeater in particular, for some reason I tend to prefer 3-1. It's like what kind of does it for me. I feel like it's a assertive gin in a certain way, and so like sometimes I want a little more vermouth with something like that.
Right. So we've got the gin botanical bill that you worked on privately on a small scale still, like you said, pushing and pulling at the different levels. I just did like a week-long gin course for distillers, and it's precisely the way you described it. Sometimes you just you got to just pull on some threads and see what happens. And it's almost a game at that point. So you scale that, you get your custom vermouth. What about the orange bitters, or is there a stand-in for that ingredient?
Yep. So we kind of opted not to do orange bitters. Instead, we incorporated some orange flower blossom into the gin, and we'll get into there's a yuzu atomizer. So we wanted kind of the yuzu to shine. You've got some soft floral orange undertones from the orange blossom. We played around with bitters, but it felt a little more elegant and sophisticated without them.
Yep. Yeah, I can totally see that. And depending on, bitters are a tricky thing. I just, I made them for 7 years and sold them. And sometimes when you're working those into an RTD, you can also deal with some strange interactions between the botanicals. Sometimes it creates some sediment. Sometimes it's not perfectly clear. So I can see, why you might just say, hey, let's let the botanicals and the gin do some of this heavy lifting. But yeah, so any other details that you want to share with about the formulation process and the collaboration process of the martini before I go grab a chilled glass from the freezer and we give it a taste?
Yeah, I would say the only other thing that just came to mind, and this was something Ari was really helpful with. He has probably significantly more experience making, commercial spirits than I do. And, there were just some things that I had not thought about. And maybe these are things that you learned, like the one, once we started experimenting with okay, this is the ABV of the alcohol that we're macerating the botanicals in. That did have a tangible effect on how it came out on the other side. And also the proof at which it went into the still would affect it too. And, we started on one end of the spectrum, and I think we ended up macerating. This is for the nerds out there, but for me also, we found that if we macerated it at 100 proof, we got good extraction for 5 days. And then we proof it down to 80 and put it in the still. Mm-hmm. And that made the gin that came out on the other side significantly smoother and retained a really nice mouthfeel. So shout out Ari, because I think that definitely made the final product much more awesome.
Yeah. All those, man, it's botanical spirits are a beast unto themselves. And I think as much credit as we can give people who distill whiskeys and, play cut points like maestros in order to 8 years down the road get the perfect extraction from the wood and oxidation from all the things that they choose to leave in the cuts. Creating a botanical bill and all those different choices about maceration, like you were saying, it's so complex, and it makes the end product, when you do really taste a remarkable gin, or in our case a cocktail made with that gin, it makes it all the more special. So I totally agree there. But I think right now I'll throw us to a little mid-roll announcement. And when we come back, we're going to taste the Hoste Martini.
Cool.
Hey everybody, just a quick announcement to let you know that our promotion for Jordan Hughes' cocktail camera course looks like it may be coming to an end in sort of the short to mid-term future. He released an Instagram reel about a week ago at the release of this episode saying that his informal scholarship for bartenders and cocktail enthusiasts has seen excellent results and engagement, and that he was going to cap it at something like 2,000 users. If you'd still like to get in on this e-course action completely free, just email me at podcast@modernbarcart.com and I'll send you an invite to our community Discord server where there's a code that will allow you to access the course completely for free, assuming that there's still spots left. So if you've been on the fence about this, don't delay. Now back to the show. All right, we are back. And it's time to do a little unboxing video. So, Robby, why don't you walk me through, I guess, the unboxing process, and we'll kind of show it for the viewers on YouTube as we go here.
Yep. Cool. First thing, I will point out, the box itself, we wanted to make truly sensational cocktails, hence the atomizer. And this is kind of my favorite thing about the package. The box is embossed, debossed with the paint strokes. So just
it's very texturally rich. Like you were talking earlier about those multiple touch points that create an overall experience, and I think this is precisely that. I mean, it's rich. It's almost like touching like a grained leather menu, for example.
Yep. Cool. So that's your atomizer zest. Took some kind of cues from the perfume industry here.
Oh, wow. Yeah, you open it up just like that and you can pull it out.
Yep.
Fantastic.
And so this is our yuzu zest. You can get into the bottle itself.
Ooh,
there she is.
Look at that. That's pretty. I love the slightly kind of like deconstructed front label.
Yeah, the striped label. We worked with a design group out of Austin, Texas called Foda, and they did a really knockout job on the packaging, design, and art direction.
All right, so we got a little neckband on here.
Yep.
Take that off.
I do recommend, there's no real separation in the Hoste, but I do like to maybe turn it upside down once or twice just for good measure.
Yeah, and so mine was in the freezer, actually. I put it in the freezer, and why don't you share with the listeners what you shared with me, because I think that's a great point. And I do appreciate that you actually go and get feedback from folks. Like you were talking with all these folks about the Gold Fashioned. What is some of the feedback that you got about freezing this specifically?
A couple of things. So one, freezers are unpredictable. My freezer was made in probably 1990, and bottles come out there pretty well. I've got friends whose freezers, I don't know what they're set to, but they will freeze anything. If you're going to be mindful throughout the process, yes, you're welcome to freeze it, welcome to chill it. You got the chilled glass, which is a nice touch. Mm-hmm. I think for most folks, it's just for the most consistently enjoyable martini experience, I like to keep it chilled in the fridge and serve it over ice. Easier on the actual hosting side. And I've found that a martini, most cocktails in general, as they get warmer, i.e. if you pull it out of the freezer and serve it up, they tend to get a little harder to drink,
Sure.
By degree. And if your martini sits on ice, it only gets more refreshing as time goes on. So that's how I've been enjoying it. And I think that's kind of the move. I think, you've got yours frozen out of the freezer. I do. Yeah, certainly it's going to be great. We'll go.
All right. And a nice little glass topper here with the gasket. I like that.
A couple ounces. Boom.
Excellent.
And then get my zest here. If it's your zest's first rodeo, I do recommend you're probably gonna want to prime it.
Yep.
So let's take a couple.
Which sure, and I mean, taking some cues from perfume, right? Right. We can.
There you go.
Right.
There you go. And then, yep.
I love that.
There we go.
Just. Oh, come on. That is so sexy. All right. So let's take first sip here.
Cheers.
Cheers to you. Wow. That vermouth is really, really beautiful. What region did you source the vermouth from?
Finger Lakes. My Cayuga Whites are the grapes, and they were developed by Cornell specifically for making wine and vermouth.
So, I mean, I totally get why you'd want this on the rocks, because this is like we were speaking earlier about the notion of serving a martini in a really controlled setting. And if you can do this a la minute at a bar with a chilled glass like the one that I have, potentially either pre-batched out of a bottle or made right there, like literally right in front of you, then this is the exact kind of martini you want. Like there's a viscosity to it in the glass that is so palpable, and that you get with those really freshly made martinis. I think it's a viscosity that goes particularly well with some of like the fresh seafood and pickled accompaniments that we imagine, as like food items to be eaten with alongside martinis. And a couple of things I want to compliment you on are the extent to which some of the notes that you described earlier come through. The sakura, the cherry blossom, comes through, and it's a notoriously difficult and delicate ingredient to work with. And obviously the yuzu, you get the essential oil with that is lovely and exactly what you want. But to me, I keep coming back to the sakura and the orange blossom. Those two floral notes really come through here, and I think those are hallmarks that are incredibly difficult to achieve.
Yep, and great point. So when we started to scale it up, we did notice, that those could be accentuated more, and so that's what we used put in the gin basket. So everything, they all got macerated in the alcohol and then distilled, but the sakura, the orange blossom, and the yuzu in particular, we jammed the gin basket full of that, just so you get a little more of those like more delicate floral aromatics.
Right. And because, depending on the setup of your still, the vapor is leaving the pot at a certain temperature, entering the gin basket at another temperature, and leaving the gin basket at yet another temperature. And so what you're getting is a different type of extraction there. So I think describing that three-dimensionality of the distilling process is important to understanding some of the end product here. And also, I don't remember the name of it, but the little peppercorns, you almost get like a husky kind of coriander-esque note from that. So obviously coriander being like one of the primary, the chief three gin botanicals that you'll find.
Yep. Yeah. So the gin recipe itself, there's juniper, there's angelica, and then obviously the Japanese botanicals. But that's a good point. And in my mind, the red sansho and coriander kind of sit in the same space. So that we thought of as a substitute. Like let's pull out the coriander and use the sansho in lieu.
Yeah, I think that's really smart. And I have to apologize that somebody decided that they were going to run a lawnmower right next to my recording studio right now. It's but hey, maybe fresh cut grass, the fall leaves, it'll kind of waft in as a little botanical accompaniment to this. But it's actually aging really well in the glass. I say aging like it's, but you know what I'm saying. It's actually without ice, it's doing rather nicely. And the viscosity, I think I can see an argument for both. I love the viscosity of this drink. So for me, if I can if I can rely on the quality of my freezer, I want this up in a chilled glass. But I could also see, going back to that, the notion that you were talking about earlier, and maybe this is a perfect jumping off point to talk about Hoste. Maybe if you're pouring this for a bunch of guests, on the rocks is the ticket because it takes the guesswork out.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's quick. Everybody gets their drink at roughly the same time. And you don't need to worry about any sort of degradation that leads to the only bad part about a martini, which is that last sip.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep. Yeah. And I guess Hoste, H-O-S-T-E comes from the Catalan, means like an unpaying guest that's staying overnight. And, part of the rebrand was, we really wanted to focus on the use occasion and how folks were actually enjoying the cocktails that we make, and, have used the Hoste guest experience as the North Star for all the decisions that we've made. And so at the end of the day, we really genuinely want to help facilitate folks, kind of connecting with quality, with their guests. And, I think that also kind of speaks to the nature of the ingredients and the product itself. So I do think, parties are unpredictable and guests are unpredictable. And, we don't want anyone to have to think about the cocktails after, other than just enjoying them and pouring them and serving them. We're really trying to take as much of the load off of the host as possible.
Right. So I need to press on this etymology because it's actually come up in other episodes that I've done. I've gone to this exact etymology page, and specifically when talking about I did a couple audio essays on the tip minimum wage here in DC, which involves words like hospitality, patron, stuff like that. And so I was looking up this word, and this word host, which comes from, it's got these references to strangers, right? Guests and hosts. And to me, one of the interesting things about this etymology, which I can link to in the show notes, is that it refers to a relationship, right? It's not just like, you can't have this notion of hosting without two people, without two different parties, without there being some sort of power dynamic between those parties, right? It's not on an equal footing because one person is, the master of the house and the other person is the guest. So there's that relationship that needs to be negotiated. And then also, like you mentioned, hospitality, hospitals, right? Hostels. These are all coming from the same root word. And in fact, if you've ever heard of military engagements where, somebody encounters an enemy host, that also comes from this, right? So a large group that would have had to be kind of sustained by a lord or something who was feeding them and watering their horses and stuff like that. So what do you think of all that nonsense that I just spat out to you? Because to me, it seems to get at the heart of what hospitality means. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I've honestly I've looked up the word, I understand all the kind of references, but this is the first time I've ever actually thought about, kind of like you said, you need a host without a guest doesn't exist. And so that's really like a fascinating way to think about it. What is interesting about that to me is this idea that about connection. Like if you have a guest and you have a host, they are going to interact and connect in some way. And it is kind of the host's, the HOSTS apostrophe, obligation to treat that guest with hospitality. And yeah, that's a kind of a trippy way to think about it. I like that.
Well, and so to me, every once in a while, I run into something that seems to operate like a motor where you've got two electromagnets that are constantly pushing each other and reversing polarities such that it creates spin, drive, and momentum. And so what we have here, almost like an Ouroboros, the snake consuming itself, going around and around. What we have here is like, it's that power dynamic. The power dynamic is the axle upon which this constantly revolving relationship between host and guest spins. And when you were speaking earlier about people being afraid of vermouth or afraid of trying something new, I think that the best hospitality experiences and the most hospitable transactions are ones in which the guest is not afraid, and that takes a lot of work from the host. I don't know. Like,
Yeah.
can you think of cocktail contexts where that's been true for you?
Yeah. I mean, so kind of two things, like just like the bar experience, kind of starts at the front door. If you're going to someone's home, it also kind of starts at the front door. Someone opens the door. Are you greeted? Do they take your coat? Is there a candle lit? Is there music playing? Is it the right music? And so I do think there's an art to hosting well, and and similarly, there's probably an art to being a good guest. And cocktails, I think, in a social setting, do a couple of things. One, they kind of help, like, for lack of a better word, they help lubricate folks. They get folks, kind of loose. You got something in your hand. You're able to taste something. You're able to like enjoy something. And then you're able to kind of like walk around the room and talk to folks. What I think is interesting about the host cocktails in a cocktail setting is it allows folks to have a shared cocktail experience, which, in the past, say in 2019, if you and I went to a bar together and you got a cool cocktail, you might say, hey man, do you want to try my drink? And then post COVID, I still hesitate to drink out of other folks' glasses, not because I'm necessarily scared of getting COVID, but now I'm like, okay, well, like, I don't know, maybe you got kids. I don't,
it's risk. It's risk. Yeah. And you're afraid, right? So here's another one of these situations where suddenly, I'm afraid of something.
Yeah. I don't want a sore throat tomorrow, but it allows us to have a shared taste experience, which is kind of cool. So now you can like have the drink, you can talk about it, you got your own. So I think cocktails are like interesting in that way. And the larger format is particularly interesting in that it allows people to kind of have a similar, have a conversation about something that they're both experiencing, but maybe experiencing differently.
Yeah, I love that. I also love the leaf blower that's going right next to my head. So yeah, I mean, as host, I mean, first of all, I mean, I love the brand for a super nerdy reason, but I think also what you're doing is you're addressing a great need. And, a lot of times when I encounter products, I just got one the other day in the email where it's like, products designed to make cocktails easier, but they're not handling details. They're just like in the infomercials where somebody's like doing a process that any normal human being would be able to do, like peeling something or pouring something, and they just mess up and they, the screen turns black and white and they just, it's the slapstick moment of not being able to do something very easy and like a normal person would do. It's like that. It's like, oh, who wants to deal with all these bottles and all this? Like, well, you're describing the joy of cocktails and mixology, right? So like, and so we solved this by putting it all in this one machine. It's like, okay, great. I think you just ruined that. And so I get a lot of pitches with people claiming to be handling, quote, the details. Mm-hmm. But I think what people will garner from the first part of our conversation was that you actually did handle the details, and you handled the details in a really thoughtful and detail oriented manner, not by just glossing over them and smoothing them out and making things bland, but by, going through each step of that process with almost a host mentality, like the mentality of a bartender who wants to create one single excellent drink for a patron at their bar. And so when I say, like, what I like about this cocktail is that it does actually like take care of that for somebody who's hosting a get together. I say it because I appreciate that it takes care of it without making sacrifices in the process. And I think that to me is the differentiation. And I love how that is embodied by the brand. I think it's a really tight connection there that actually does resonate with me as a consumer.
Yeah. And I think like the taking care of those details, the end goal is for us, and for me personally, was just to create an experience for people. And, yes, folks can make cocktails, and some folks can make great cocktails, but the host is as much about the experience of enjoying the cocktail with folks as it is the actual cocktail. If that makes sense. Like it's about all the things that happen around the drink. And we are trying to help facilitate those happening in a way that is ultimately as enjoyable as possible for folks.
Yeah, I mean, think about, you set the stage for us early on in the conversation. Think about all of those details that you get to soak in at a cocktail bar. And it's always great to host a party at your home. But as soon as you have that responsibility, enjoying those details are just out the window. And so it seems like this opens that door back up, right? And so I think, there's, to me, I having tasted this drink and having tasted the Gold Fashioned, I'm gonna go away and think a little bit more about what it means to hosts at home, because that's something I have a small space. I haven't really been doing it. There's constantly leaf blowers. Like, who wants that? But it's sort of gotten me excited to think about like the fine art of hosting at home. So that's definitely going to be one of my takeaways for this conversation. But as we wrap up here, I want to open up the floor to you and just make sure there's not something that we're grossly overlooking here, and maybe ask if there's stuff coming down the road that you're excited to share.
Yep. So again, thinking, looking through the lens of kind of hosting and hospitality, we want to extend the product line. We'd like to have understanding that certain people have varying tastes. We got a few things in the hopper. We have a perfect Manhattan that we're working on for the spring.
Is that perfect in the cocktail sense?
Yes. Yep. So it'll be, sweet vermouth, dry vermouth, still dialing in the whiskey for this one, and gonna get into some lower ABV, lower alc products in late summer, fall, and possibly a mezcal Negroni.
I like that.
Just so that, like, if for folks that are having events, you can have an array of options to choose from, and that you can feel good about pouring, you can feel good about gifting, and each one will hopefully tell, will be rooted in a classic cocktail, but have a unique perspective driven by the various collaborators.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I like that you're bringing in folks who have specific points of view on this. I think it adds surface area to the brand, and I think that's important. It's a great way to help people fall in love with what's in the glass, especially as it evolves and with how complex it is. And I do want to note that we're 20 minutes into this pour, and still great viscosity, and it's just starting to hit that point where now it's a little bit more vermouthy to me. I think the vermouth comes out more as it warms up, and I've got about 2 minutes left in this before it's too warm to truly enjoy. that's a pretty long life for something that comes out of the freezer and goes into a chilled glass. That's more than enough time for somebody who's not engaged in a podcast to finish and enjoy a good martini. So win.
Nice. Thank you.
Yeah. So we'll link to everything on the show notes here, but do you have time for a few quick lightning questions before we take off?
Yeah, let's do it. Love this part.
Yeah, this is, I had fun with these because this is martini themed. So I take it that you and probably most of our listeners will be familiar with the kill, marry, copulate format, where you've got three options. You get to choose one that you kill, one that you marry, and one that you get a little passionate with, but it's a short-term fling. So I've got a few of these set up for you here. And martini theme. So number one, KM copulate. Gin martini, vodka martini, dirty martini. And I know that the dirty martini definition gets a little blurry, so it can be in your mind either a dirty martini with vodka or a dirty martini with gin.
Yep. Mary would certainly be the gin martini. One night stand, quick fling, dirty martini for sure. I got no problems with the dirty martini. Happen to like them, have enjoyed quite a few. Vodka martini, not doing it for me.
Okay, good. Next triumvirate here. We've got, this is ratios. So we'll go dry martini, which I would say would be like start with like 5, 6 to 8 to 1, kind of like that quarter ounce vermouth kind of territory. A 50-50 martini, which is 1 to 1, and an upside down martini, which is 2 parts vermouth to 1 part gin. KMF.
Yep. The 2 to 1. I like a 2 to 1 martini. Wait, sorry, no, 50-50.
50-50. Okay.
Yeah. 50-50. I'll rock the 50-50. I would marry the 50-50. One night stand would probably be like the reverse. Or the inverted,
the upside down.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I like vermouth, especially with a nice vermouth.
I like it.
And then dry, again,
getting rid of that dry.
Not for me. I like gin, but if I'm gonna go through all that trouble.
That's good. Anybody who designs and launches a martini, I think, should have a healthy appreciation for vermouth. Otherwise, like what are we here talking about? So that makes sense to me. Now we're talking about martini riffs. So we've got the Vesper, we've got a Gibson, which is again more in that savory camp, and then we've got a Martinez, which we're rocking some sweet vermouth and other sweetness in there.
I feel similarly about the Gibson as I do about the dirty. So that, for me, that's like a, feeling kind of wild. We'll try it out tonight. The Martinez, really like the Martinez, actually. I think Martinez is underrated. And when it's done just right, awesome cocktail. I would marry a well-made Martinez.
Okay.
Vesper, I would probably pass on that one.
Oh.
Cool drink, interesting. Yeah, I get it. It's nice, kind of refreshing.
Now, do you when you think of Vesper, do you think shaken or do you think stirred? Because I've heard that is contentious. When
I think Vesper, I think about having people just order them from me and being very opinionated about it. And maybe that's what it just kind of takes me back to being in service and like, all right, here comes they got a Vesper, but they want it like this, and I got to like shake it with one hand, I don't know. Yeah. Fair.
And I probably don't do my Vespers in the way that many people do. I usually sub in lavender bitters there to kind of go with the lillet a little bit, kind of like that white flower lavender kind of thing going on. So again, I'm a non-traditional there, but I do love me a Vesper. And then
just slight tangent. I am interested in these kind of martini riffs where people are turning them into like spritzes or 75s, martinis with tonic. I haven't played around, but I do find that interesting. And like, I feel like a Vesper with soda water. I don't know.
Yeah.
I think it's like an interesting way to go with the martini at some point.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think we're rapidly getting there with how popular it is these days. And so the last martini KMF I have for you here is is olive related. So we've got different olives as garnishes in the dirties and the vodkas. I'm curious, are you a pimento olive guy, a blue cheese olive guy, Castelvetrano olive?
Man. All right. So the first bar I bar backed at a club in Chicago just before Violet
Mhm.
Hour opened, and they had
Right.
olives, and they were just like out of the jar, just whatever.
Yeah.
And I would eat them all night, and I got really sick of them. So I'm not into like the OG regular olive with the red pimento in it. Blue cheese, yeah, man, sign me up. Um, Low key, my favorite olive, which I have, is a pimento cheese stuffed olive.
Oh, that's very
So
Midwest.
yeah, those are great, man. That's like a little meal in and of itself. Uh, so blue cheese olive, I would probably copulate and marry. Uh, I would keep that one, and then regular one, kind of pass on. And what was the other one?
Like Castelvetrano, it's like the green, the really green guys. They're to me that was the olive that made me understand why one might use an olive as a garnish because it's briny and
Yeah,
it's rich. Um,
I
they
like
tend to be
those.
they tend to be bigger and like darker green than the traditional ones. So yeah,
Yeah, those are
I,
nice.
yeah,
Those are
I
nice,
like them.
but I like that blue cheese.
Yeah, I love it. All right, next question. What is a martini? This maybe is getting to what we were just talking about. What's a martini format, ingredient, garnish, service method, anything in the martini space that you wish more professional and home bartenders would get on board with?
Yeah, comes in a bottle. It's got yuzu zest. Yeah, this is what people need to get into.
Yeah.
I think the martini on the rocks. I'm like in the last
Yes.
couple months, I've just drinking more martinis now than I ever have. I like the martini on the rocks is really doing it for me. Even now, like 20 minutes in, this is like amazing.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So yeah, martini on the rocks. I think people got to get on board with that.
I think the best way to get on board with the martini on the rocks is to order it at a bar and like at a bar that you like and that you respect, where you normally get their cocktails that are like their signature cocktails that are listed on a menu. And so you go in, the bartender comes up, you there's a little recognition, and they ask what you'd like, and the move is to say, I think I'd like a 2-to-1 or a 4-to-1 or a whatever to one. If you trust them to make you a regular martini with the ratio, I want this kind of martinis on a single large rock lemon twist, and just watch how they react to that. And like that's to me, I did that at one place, and they were like, "Okay, let's go." And just seeing their like excitement to make that drink for me was like, it's like, yes, I feel seen. This is now valid for me. This is on the table. Let's do this.
Yep. They know that jams.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So last question in the lightning round here. Any advice for either somebody who runs a professional bar program or somebody who is a home bartender who gets excited by the Hoste Martini when they sample it and says, "Huh, I like this. Gonna keep this in my back pocket, but I want to try playing around with my own kind of freezer martini." Any advice for creating those as like a signature serve at a bar or a home?
Yep. I would say, I would taste the gin. I would play with the gin and vermouth pairing, because gin, there is a rainbow spectrum of gin profiles out there, and similarly, there's all sorts of vermouths that range a wide spectrum. So I would encourage people to freak how they feel, and kind of with everything, like just taste it, and be honest with yourself. How does this sit with you? And I think the more folks can kind of develop that, I guess I would call it intuition, but like that, they can take all the filters out, everything they've learned, and just be able to taste something in a vacuum and say, oh, I like this, or I appreciate this about it. I think once you can taste things in that way, it really opens up a lot of possibilities to what you can do.
Right. And I think it can even be a collaborative process. I mean, Robby, you've got a team, but a lot of people have partners or friends or spouses, and you can say, hey, take these 3 gins, pour them in these 3 glasses, take notes, but don't tell me which is which, and I'm going to taste them, when you call me back out. And so, that way you can kind of blind your way into it, see what you like. And I think a lot of the things that we talked about in this conversation about ratios of vermouth, right? Like that's a signature. Boom. Types of bitters. Boom. There's another signature twist that you can add. So adding to me, and I love that this is where we're kind of rounding out this conversation, is that when you look at a cocktail that has so few ingredients, the real opportunity to add surface area and uniqueness to that is in the tiny, minute details. So don't be afraid to get in there and enjoy the process of getting lost in those details and using them to build the story flavor-wise of what you want to be your signature martini. That's how I would do it. Yep.
And I think it's a good point about bringing your partner or friend, drinking a whole freezer martini by yourself. Again, sure, go for it. But much more enjoyable if you got someone on board and willing to take that ride with you.
Well, I've got a toddler, and I want to see what she thinks of this when she gets back today. So I won't be doing it alone. But Robby, thank you as always, man. Just a true pleasure to chat with you. I knew, having not even tasted it, that this was going to be an excellent experience, and it certainly delivered on that front. Share with our listeners where they can grab this, maybe even a price point too, because we haven't mentioned that yet.
Yep. So hostecocktails.com, HOSTECOCKTAILS, hostecocktails.com. We ship to 46 states. It'll go directly to your door.
Whoa.
The Gold Fashioned this year, $150. The Martini, $65, about 10 cocktails per bottle.
That sounds like you're saving money.
Feels like it.
Yeah. So we'll have links, like I said, on the show notes to everything. And Robby, I've got just a tiny little sip here. I think I'm going to top it up so that it's appropriately cold, so that I'm not giving you the worst as a cheers. But I want to thank you for a beautiful cocktail and for being a guest here on the Modern Bar Cart podcast. Cheers, my friend.
Pleasure chatting with you, man.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, there's 2 big things you can do for us here at Modern Bar Cart. One would be to tell your friends and family if you think they'd enjoy listening to us talk about cocktails. And if they don't download podcasts, they can always stream our episodes on their desktop directly from the show notes page at modernbarcart.com. The other thing you can do to help would be to head on over to iTunes or wherever you download your podcasts and leave us a review. 5 stars are great, but we're more interested in your feedback. And the beauty is, the more reviews we have, the easier it will be for other folks out there to learn about our show. We're trying to start a cocktail revolution here, and by spreading the word, you're helping us fight the good fight. You can always reach us by emailing podcast@modernbarcart.com if you're looking for cocktail or bartending advice, or if you're a pro who would like to pull up a mic and be interviewed for all to hear. Also, definitely follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Modern Bar Cart for cocktail porn, recipes, and entertaining tips. And keep an eye out for new product releases and special offers, which are happening all the time. We love our listeners, and we really enjoy giving you exclusive discounts and sneak peeks at our latest and greatest cocktail projects. This episode may be over, but for you, the mixological fun and adventures are just beginning. So remember, folks, drink responsibly and experiment boldly. This episode was made possible with editing and sound design by Samantha Reed, gin and martini insights courtesy of Robby Haynes, and a little bit of interview magic by yours truly. This has been a production of the Modern Bar Cart Podcast, copyright 2023.